In this video, I'm going to try to confuse you a little bit. I'll explain that in a minute. We're going to talk about attackers, common threats from the standpoint of attackers. And then later on, we'll talk about common threats from the standpoint of attack types. So now here comes the confusion. Hackers and crackers. It all depends on who you read, what article you're reading, what textbook you're reading, or who you're listening to as to what the differences are between these two. If you were to listen to some of the earlier hackers, such as Kevin Mitnick and Steve Wozniak, for example, you would discover that they talk a lot about the things that they did just because they want to learn how things work. They're interested in the inner workings of the cell phone, or the inner workings of the telephone system, or the inner workings of computers. And so they did what they did, sometimes maliciously, sometimes not maliciously, just so that they could learn. It was like a puzzle to them, and they wanted to figure out this puzzle. On the other hand, crackers may not have as much coding experience. They may not be as deep. They're just interested in getting into a system for the purpose of getting into the system, not for the purpose of getting to know more about how it works. Another view of it is that hackers are sometimes interested in, or said to be interested in, obtaining data, whereas crackers are more interested in the systems themselves. This is more the definition that our textbook uses. In some definitions, people like to say that the hacker is more ethical, in that the hacker just wants to know how things work, whereas the cracker does the same thing as hackers but is more unethical. In other words, they're doing it not just to learn how things work, but maybe for more nefarious purposes. So take your pick, but you should be able to recognize when we do the quiz in this class, the difference between these based on at least one of these three definitions. Now, the cyber terrorist is one who likes to compromise systems for some ideological purpose. So, for example, you might look at a group like Anonymous, and they might break into systems or shut down systems because somebody is a child pornographer, or because they just don't like the way a company does business, and so they would mess with those systems just to get back at them, so to speak. Whereas if it's politically motivated, we sometimes call that a hacktivist or a cyber activist. So these would be, as example, when governments do hacking, or somebody who does hacking for politically motivated reasons. Finally, we're going to talk about the script kiddie or the packet monkey. This is an individual, usually this is the one you think of as a hacker, the pimply faced little kid who, not necessarily a little kid, but the pimply faced kid, who just uses the stuff that's out there. They use the software that other people have written. They may not really know the inner workings of the tools that they're using, or how things work. They just know that they can download a tool and, hey, this is cool, look, I can break into this with this tool. These people are often derided by true hackers and crackers because they're just riding on the wave of what somebody else has done. Not really true hackers, and this is kind of a derisive term right here, script kiddie or packet monkey.